All right, let's jump right in today. We're taking a deep dive into something, well, a little different. Government finances, yeah, you heard that right. But stick with me because we're specifically looking at the Department of Defense, how the DoD manages money. And it's actually way more interesting than you might think. We've got our hands on this draft request for, quote, December 2024, and it basically lays out a program, the Defense Agencies Initiative, DAI.
And this document, it's like a sneak peek behind the curtain, shows us exactly how the DoD is working to drag their financial systems kicking and screaming into the 21st century. We're talking about AI, robotic process automation.
Wait, hold on. So the DoD is embracing cutting-edge tech, like, for their finances? That already has me hooked. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit. What's the big picture here? What's the Defense Agency's initiative actually trying to do?
Okay, so picture this. You're in charge of the finances for, well, a huge E organization, like the DoD, huge. You got all these different agencies, and they all have their own way of doing things. The current system, it's like trying to make a quilt out of scraps, all patched together, different pieces added over time, outdated, tons of errors, and tracking money. Forget about it.
Oh, man, sounds like a recipe for a disaster. So is DAI basically trying to get everyone on the same page?
Exactly. It's this huge push to modernize, totally transform how most of the defense agencies handle their finances. The goal, a unified system, all web-based, that operates in near real time. Everyone who needs it, financial managers, decision makers, they all have accurate financial info at their fingertips.
Okay, so it's like swapping that messy quilt for a brand new state-of-the-art system. And this all ties into the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, right?
You got it. DFAS, that's the core of the DoD's finances, and DAI is built to work seamlessly with it. The idea is every dollar is accounted for, and those funds are being used where they need to be to, support the warfighter effectively.
Makes sense. But I imagine with so many different agencies, there are going to be some pretty big differences in how they manage their money. How does DAI handle that?
That's a good question. One of the key things about DAI is that each defense agency, they get their own unique legal entity and their own set of books within the system. Think of it like a big apartment building, right? Separate apartments, each tailored to the people living there, but all under one roof.
So it's centralized but flexible. Pretty neat. But what about the tech behind all of this? What's actually powering this big financial makeover?
They went with Oracle e-Business Suite for DAI. It's a solid platform used all over in government and the private sector. It's known for being robust, scalable, and with DAI, it's going to be deployed across more than 30 defense agencies worldwide.
Wow, that's a lot of agencies. So it's a proven system, something that can handle the sheer scale of the DoD's finances. But even with something this advanced, I'm guessing there are still challenges.
Oh, for sure. And one of the biggest is making sure everyone who needs to use DAI can actually access it and, get help when they need it. Right now, each agency is basically responsible for its own troubleshooting and support, which, well, it can be a bit of a mess.
So like 30 different IT help desks. Yeah, that sounds pretty inefficient.
Exactly. And that's where this blanket purchase agreement comes in, a BPA.
Okay, so this BPA, is it about bringing in outside expertise to help manage and support this incredibly complex system?
You got it. And it's not just about keeping the lights on, so to speak. This BPA, it's officially called the Defense Agencies Initiative Financial Transactions Helpdesk and Associated Programmatic Support. Try saying that 3 times fast.
FTAPS. I like it. So what are they aiming for with this FTAPS BPA? What are the big goals?
They have 3 main objectives. First up, improve the user experience. Make the system as efficient as possible. So that means quick resolution for common issues and making sure everyone has, well, continuous access.
Yeah, with so many agencies involved, that sounds like a massive undertaking.
Oh, it is. Then they want to enhance the performance of DAI overall, which means finding contractors who are basically experts in both Oracle systems and e-government finances. That's a pretty unique combo.
So they need tech wizards who also speak fluent government finance.
Right. And the third objective, this is the one that I find really interesting, is all about optimizing costs. By using advanced tech, AI, machine learning, and robotic process automation.
Wow, the DoD jumping on the automation bandwagon, that's pretty cool. How are they going to use all that tech to actually support DAI?
Well, to get all of this done, the FTAPS BPA is divided into 8 task areas, each one focusing on a specific part of supporting and managing DAI.
8 task areas. That definitely gives you an idea of just how much work goes into keeping a system like this running smoothly.
Oh, absolutely. And these task areas, they cover everything. help desk support, system maintenance,
Yeah.
financial reporting, knowledge management, you name it. It's a pretty comprehensive approach.
Well, instead of listing all 8, maybe we could focus on a few that really show the scope of this BPA. I'm particularly interested in how they're going to use those advanced technologies you mentioned.
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Okay, so task area 2. It's called DAI, Tier 1 Service Operation and Automation. It sounds kind of basic, but I bet there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, yeah, definitely. This one's all about providing that frontline support. It's the help desk, basically, for DAI. So if someone's having trouble logging in, can't figure out the system, has a question about a specific transaction, the help desk is their go-to.
So it's a lot more than just answering emails and phone calls, huh? They're real troubleshooters.
Exactly. They'll be dealing with access requests, fixing technical problems, tracking every incident. And get this, during peak times, like end of the fiscal year, when everyone's scrambling to close out their books, they'll need to be available outside of normal business hours.
Makes sense. When deadlines are tight, you need all hands on deck.
Yeah.
But you mentioned AI and machine learning earlier. How do those fit into this task area?
Well, this is what's really cool. They're using AI to proactively identify and address potential issues. Imagine a system that learns from past help desk tickets, and it can actually warn you about a problem before it even happens.
That's amazing, like a crystal ball for tech glitches.
Pretty much. And to make things even smoother, they're using robotic process automation, RPA, to automate those really routine tasks. Think of them as little software robots, taking care of the repetitive stuff so the human staff can focus on the more complicated issues.
Working smarter, not harder. I can see how that would really free up some resources.
Exactly. It's about using tech to its full potential to make DAI, well, as user-friendly and efficient as possible.
Okay, this is really fascinating. I'm starting to see how these technologies are really changing the game for government finances. What other task areas should we take a look at?
Let's jump ahead to task area 5, DAI Financial Resource Management. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in terms of, managing the DoD's money.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So this one's all about making sure funds are being used correctly, that financial reporting is accurate, transparent, and that everything is following, all those government regulations. We're talking about supporting audits, the OMB A123, which is basically a deep dive into an agency's financial statements.
So they're not just assuming everything's fine, they're actively checking.
Right. And there's this interesting detail here. They need expertise in managing different types of funds, like revolving funds and general funds. Revolving funds are used for things that generate revenue, like military commissaries. And general funds, well, those cover most other government expenses.
It's not just one big pot of money, huh? There are all these different categories and rules for how they can be used. Never realized government finances were so, nuanced.
Oh, it's more complex than most people realize. And this task area, it really highlights how important it is to understand all those nuances if you want to make sure the money is managed right.
Makes sense. Okay, one more task area before we wrap up this part of our deep dive. What about task area 7, DI knowledge management? What's that all about?
This one's all about ensuring that everyone who needs information about DAI can get it, Imagine you're a new employee and you're trying to learn this complex system. You need a one-stop shop for everything. Training materials, troubleshooting guides, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like building a DAI encyclopedia, making sure all that valuable info doesn't get lost or, stuck within different agencies.
You got it. And they'll be using SharePoint for this, a platform I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with.
Yeah.
Managing all those documents, keeping track of versions, making sure everyone can find what they need. There's even a requirement for them to keep a secure repository for all those, all those security forms.
Well, that makes sense. With a system this sensitive, you have to be super careful about who can access what.
Absolutely. And speaking of security, we haven't even touched on the key personnel and all the those stringent security requirements that come with working with the DoD.
Oh, that's right. We've barely scratched the surface of this fascinating world. But I guess we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Security, it's no surprise it's a big deal when you're talking about a system that handles all the finances for the entire Department of Defense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what kind of safeguards are we talking about here? What does this BPA actually tell us about security?
Well, first off, they specifically call out the need for certain key personnel, like with very specific experience. You've got the program manager, who's ultimately responsible for the project being successful, and the help desk lead, who's overseeing that that frontline support we talked about.
And these aren't like entry-level positions, are they? What kind of experience are we talking about?
Nope, not at all. For the program manager, they're looking for someone with at least 5 years experience managing similar programs.
Mhm.
And ideally, they'd have a project management professional certification from PMI, AD, a certified defense financial manager certification.
So they need someone who can not only manage a huge project, but also really gets the whole government finance thing.
Exactly. And then, of course, you've got security clearances because you're dealing with really sensitive information. Both the program manager and the help desk lead, they need an active secret clearance.
Yeah, that seems pretty standard for anyone working with this kind of data. But is it just limited to those two roles?
Oh, no, not at all. The BPA makes it clear that every single contractor working on DAI, no matter what they're doing, has to follow strict security protocols.
So we're talking more than just having a security clearance. What kind of protocols are we talking about here?
Well, you've got compliance with cybersecurity protocols, obviously, strict rules about how to handle sensitive data. And get this, they even need a facility clearance.
Wait, a facility clearance? What does that even mean?
It means the contractor's workspace, like their physical office, it has to meet certain security standards. These are set by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. It's all about making sure that the environment where they're working is secure, that the information is protected.
Wow, they're not messing around, are they? Really shows you how seriously they take security, especially with these systems. But I have to imagine that with everything going on these days, cybersecurity is a particularly big concern. Does the BPA address that specifically?
Oh, absolutely. The BPA says that the government can do a cyber supply chain risk assessment of the contractor, and they can do this at any time. They're not just checking the box and moving on. They're actively looking for anything that could be a vulnerability.
So, being proactive, trying to catch any weak points before something happens, what are some of the things they're going to be looking at during these assessments?
Oh, they look at everything. The software, the potential for foreign influence over the contractor, it's all on the table. Cybersecurity practices, how they handle data, even the backgrounds of their employees. It's pretty thorough.
And what happens if they DO find a risk during one of these assessments?
Well, the BPA says the government might have to take action to mitigate the risks. Could even mean terminating the contract if it's serious enough. They don't take any chances when it comes to the security of these systems.
Yeah, no kidding. It really drives home the point that security is, well, kind of a big deal in this line of work. But beyond the high-level clearances and these cyber assessments, are there any other requirements that really stand out to you?
hmm Well, the BPA also gets into some of the less glamorous details like travel regulations and how contractors are reimbursed for their expenses.
Ah, yes, the exciting world of government travel, per diems, travel authorizations. I'm guessing it's not as simple as just booking a flight and, heading off to your destination.
You got it. The BPA lays out some very specific rules referencing the federal travel regulation for travel within the U.S. Then there's the joint travel regulations for Alaska, Hawaii, U.S. territories. And if you're going international, the Department of State standardized regulations.
So a whole new set of rules depending on where you're going. Sounds complicated.
It definitely can be.
Uh.
And it's not just where you travel, but how you travel. You need approval for long-distance travel, got to submit these detailed travel authorization requests, and then there are passport and visa requirements for international trips.
Man, I bet all that paperwork can be overwhelming.
Yeah, it's a lot. But it looks like they're trying to make the process a little more efficient in some ways. For example, the BPA mentions a flat rate per diem for those long-term travel assignments. So if you're on a TDY, temporary duty assignment, for more than 30 days in one place, you get a lower per diem rate for lodging and meals.
So like a built-in incentive to be cost-conscious, maybe stay in a less fancy hotel.
Exactly. And that focus on cost savings, it applies to other direct costs too. The BPA lays out a process for requesting approval for any purchases.
Hold on, so if they need to buy new software or hardware, they can't just, put it on the company card and send the government the bill.
Not a chance. They have to submit this thing called a consent to purchase, which outlines everything, what they need, how much it costs, why it's essential to the project. And of course, they need to justify the purchase, show they've looked at other options, and this is the most cost-effective way to go.
And even then, it's not a guarantee, right?
Exactly. The DoD, they want to make sure every dollar is being spent wisely, transparently. They scrutinize those requests very carefully. And, of course, they need to make sure that whatever they're buying follows all the relevant procurement regulations. It's a pretty rigorous process.
Sounds like they're walking a tightrope, trying to give contractors the flexibility they need to do the job, but also keep a close eye on how the money's being spent.
You said it. And speaking of balancing act, one thing that surprised me, the BPA actually talks about using commercial software and how those agreements, the licenses and stuff, could conflict with the government's needs.
Interesting. Why would that be a concern?
Well, think about it. The government wants to make sure they control their data and systems, even when they're using commercial products. They don't want to get stuck in an agreement with some software vendor that could, restrict how they use the software or, limit their access to the data.
So they're being super careful about the fine print, making sure those software licenses don't come back to bite them.
Exactly. The BPA says that contractors have to provide copies of any supplier agreements, for review before they buy anything. This lets the government really look over the terms and conditions, make sure it's all good for them, and catch any potential conflicts.
Smart move. You don't want to get into a situation where a vendor can suddenly hold your data hostage.
No kidding. It's a reminder that even though we're talking about cutting-edge tech and, complex financial systems, there's still a lot of legal and procedural stuff that has to be in place.
It's all part of the fun of working with the government, I guess.
Oh, yeah. You've got to be, agile, innovative, but also you can't forget about being meticulous and compliant.
Well said. And it sounds like that attention to detail, it goes beyond just software licenses. This BPA covers things like intellectual property rights, press releases, even contractor identification.
Yep, that's right.
Wait, contractor identification, what do you mean by that?
Oh, it says that contractor personnel, they have to wear a visible ID when they're meeting with government personnel.
Yeah.
All about transparency, accountability, making sure everyone knows who's who.
No sneaking around the Pentagon?
Nope. And, of course, we can't talk about government work without mentioning the Common Access Card.
Ah, the CAC, the badge of honor. Well, maybe just a badge for anyone working with the DoD. What does the BPA say about CACs?
Pretty standard stuff. All contractor personnel, they need a CAC to get access to government systems and facilities. It's basically a physical representation of all those security protocols we've been talking about. Allows the government to track who's accessing what, the whole thing.
And I'm guessing it's not just about having the card, but, actually using it responsibly.
Right. The BPA is very clear. CACs can only be used for work that's related to the contract and have to be returned to the government when the contract's over.
It's a reminder that these cards, they're more than just a convenience, right? They represent access to sensitive information.
And with that access comes a responsibility to protect that information.
So we've covered a lot here, from the expertise you need to manage DAI to all the security and procedures involved in working with the DoD. But there's one more piece I'd like to explore: accessibility.
Ah, that's a good point. Accessibility is really important, especially when you're talking about, modernizing systems, making sure everyone can actually use them.
And it looks like the DoD, they're taking that seriously.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we talked about the tech behind DAI, the security requirements, all those travel regulations, even per diems. But you mentioned accessibility.
And it's great to see that the DoD is actually calling for compliance with Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, right in this BPA.
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with Section 508. What's that all about?
So basically, Section 508 is a law that says any electronic and information technology that the government develops, buys, maintains, uses, it has to be accessible to people with disabilities.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about making sure everyone has equal access, regardless of their abilities. But how does that apply to, a complex system like DAI?
Well, it means that everything, the software, the websites, the multimedia content, all of it, needs to be designed with accessibility in mind from the get-go.
So we're not just talking about physical access, like making sure someone in a wheelchair can get into a building. It's about the digital environment, too.
Exactly. Think about things like alt text for images, making sure websites can be navigated with a keyboard, videos with captions and transcripts. The whole point is to remove those barriers, create a smooth experience for everyone.
And is this just a suggestion, or is it a hard requirement for anyone working on DAI?
Oh, it's a requirement. And the DoD, they're serious about it. The BPA says very clearly all those ICT products, platforms, services, they all have to comply with Section 508. No exceptions.
So no cutting corners on this, but how do they actually make sure contractors are meeting those standards?
The BPA requires contractors to give them detailed info about the accessibility of their products and services.
Mm.
They have to show exactly how they meet those specific standards, the ones outlined in Section 508, and they need documentation and testing to back it up.
So they can't just say they're compliant, they have to prove it.
Right. It's about being transparent, making sure accessibility is a core part of the project from start to finish.
I'm really impressed with how the DoD is, incorporating accessibility into this whole modernization effort. It's not an afterthought, it's a fundamental requirement.
It really shows a shift in how we think about tech. Right. It's not okay to design things that exclude entire groups of people. Yeah. Inclusion is crucial, and it's great to see the DoD leading the way.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into DAI and this FTAPS BPA, what are your main takeaways? What really stands out to you?
For me, it's how comprehensive this whole modernization effort is. They're not just thinking about the technology. They're thinking about the people who are going to use it, the security, the need for, solid support, and making the system accessible to everyone.
It's definitely clear that they're putting a lot of thought into this. They're not just throwing a new coat of paint on an old system. This is about creating something truly modern, something that's going to serve the DoD for years to come.
And it's not just about replacing old stuff with new stuff.
Yeah.
It's about fundamentally changing how these agencies manage their money.
Yeah.
Making everything more efficient, more transparent, more accountable.
It's a real glimpse into the future of government, where technology is key to the mission and inclusion is, well, it's just non-negotiable.
And I think it raises an interesting question. As the DoD keeps moving forward with all this modernization, how is it going to impact their ability to, ultimately support the warfighter in the long run, I mean.
That's a great question to consider. Well, it's been a fascinating journey exploring all the ins and outs of government finances, the challenges, and the incredible potential of these systems. Thanks for joining me.